So I've been thinking a lot recently about the fact that when I look back on my high school education and even college education and some of the books that I was supposed to read or learn about in those years, it was hard for me to really remember what the books were about, the themes, really anything that I was supposed to take away from those things could not be brought to mind easily. And I've seen this as kind of one of the catalysts for many other people that have YouTube channels about, this realization, getting them back into reading books. And this is really the same for me. My friend and I started a 2-person book club at the beginning of this year, and ever since doing that, it's become clear, that I wasn't actually learning from these books. And now my goal is to go back and try to understand what are these books really talking about. And part of making this video is actually to think through some of those things that I have been learning from a few different books, and communicate them, clarify my thoughts, and maybe start doing this as a practice going forward so that I don't repeat the same mistake that I made. Or maybe it's just a natural thing for someone in high school, when you're 16, 17. I wanted to talk about this stack of books right here. So there's quite a few here that I've been able to read in addition to others over the past, I would say, 6 months. So I'm going to touch on some themes that run across each of these books, and when I get to each of those themes, I'll dive in and discuss my own thoughts and how it relates to this overall notion of education and reading, and why we read, and why it's important to really learn about things like the humanities, of which reading is a big part of. I guess the first thing that I would talk about is, why is it important to read? The first one here by Zakaria, In Defense of a Liberal Arts Education. Notice that there's a trend away from the liberal arts and from the humanities. And one of the key things that I learned in that book is, and I don't think he's really the only one to say this, but he touches on the idea that in order to think, you must first be able to write. And in order to really know how to write, you must first learn how to read. And thinking obviously is extremely important in our lives, and seems to be deteriorating. With every year it seems as though we're thinking less and just consuming more, whether it's content on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. That's the way it's going. And so if we want to rekindle our thinking capabilities and our thinking functions, I go back to that book and think about writing and reading, and how that is really the basis for which we are able to then start thinking. And then secondly, there's a book by Harold Bloom, How to Read and Why. Harold Bloom, not Howard Bloom. I don't know why I said that, but How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. And one of the quotes from this book is, he talks about how reading is having an internal dialogue with yourself, and as you read, you're really conversing with your inner thoughts. And that's related to the Zakaria point about reading is thinking through also writing. So by reading, you're practicing that internal dialogue. And even though you're reading someone else's words, in order to comprehend what it is that is going on, it's really you're talking to yourself. And I just noticed, after I finish a book, for the next 2-3 weeks, the thoughts linger in my head, and I find myself driving or listening to music, and I'll have to turn down the volume because I realize I'm thinking about something I read, and I want to let that thought kind of develop and I ruminate on it. And so it is really true that when you start reading, you do start thinking much better. That was kind of the establishment of why we should be reading and why it's important to think. And so essentially that got me to thinking, well, why wasn't I learning in high school, and why wasn't I able to think in high school? And this next point is not from one of the books, but it was a article that I read, which is called "I Know Why the Caged Bird Cannot Read," and I forget the author, but I can link that below. But essentially in this article, the author discusses how the curriculum in English classes in high schools has been more and more diluted over time, and that students are no longer spending time reading classics. They're reading modern contemporary works, or works that are chosen not for their literary quality, but just because it's kind of what's in vogue, or the message of the book is good, or the moral teachings of the book is good. So you don't really get to the crux of the greatest works of literature, and so by nature of that, the books aren't challenging you as much. And so that's another possibility for why if you went through a high school public education, you might not have gotten what you needed in order to be able to really think critically and read challenging works and write about them and form critical thinking skills through doing so. Which brings me to another point here on thinking and what were we doing maybe instead of reading the classics, or even if we were reading English, the books we had in English class, which I actually didn't really do as much because I was doing other things, which gets into this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. So something that we can all probably relate to in childhood is, while we weren't necessarily reading, we probably were watching TV or playing video games. And the whole thesis in Amusing Ourselves to Death is that the invention of the television essentially has eroded the public's ability to actually engage in critical thinking. And part of the reason is that he posits that television can only be entertainment. Which is an interesting idea, and I think I agree with that. And not only is television purely entertainment and nothing else, but because television portrays things that we see in real life that aren't entertainment, such as educational TV shows, or even religious processions on TV, or public discourse happening on TV. So think about presidential debates. Because all TV is entertainment, and these things which are actually serious and not entertainment are on TV, they have become entertainment, which then we expect are, in reality, when we see something like a classroom in real life, we expect it to be like TV because we're so inundated with entertainment on TV. And so the portrayal of those things on TV kind of distorts our perception of what something like education should be like. So when you're in class and you're so used to having great entertainment on TV, and you see school being portrayed on TV as fun and entertaining, you then go to your classroom and expect the same. And when it's not the same, you find it hard to engage. And so not only were we not getting probably the best, greatest works in our high school education, and I will say my high school was probably better at this, and I think we did read a lot of great books, Greek, Sophocles and Shakespeare, and we read a lot of older books that would be considered part of the Western canon. Even if we were presented with really great works, it probably was hard to actually engage in those things because we were so used to highly stimulating and highly entertaining content outside of our schooling. Then that brings me to another point here, and it's connected actually in Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is this one. The author opens up with a comparison to this book, Brave New World, by Aldous Huxley, and he compares essentially Brave New World to 1984, George Orwell, and argues that instead of what most people think as us living in, which is the Orwellian future, we actually live in a Huxleyan future portrayed in Brave New World. And this future is one of complete collectivism. There is no more individual. People take drugs called soma to essentially eradicate any negative feelings that they have. There is so much entertainment and stimulation around, and society just becomes this kind of constant stream of pleasure and very little pain. And anytime there would be pain, you can take soma, so there really is no pain. And while I don't think we're in this kind of a society now, I do think that, as is said in Amusing Ourselves to Death, we're probably closer to that than we are the Orwellian future of Big Brother and constant surveillance, or maybe we have a mix of both. But you can see that critical thinking is individual. In order to be an individual, you must have your own thoughts and think in a way that's unique to you. And so, this is how kind of reading plays into this. By reading, we can form our own individual identity and our thoughts, and not fall into this collectivist kind of hive mind, we only exist for the group mindset, which seems to be prevalent in today's world. And that ties into another book that I was reading, which I don't have a physical copy, I actually listened to it, but it's called Organization Man. And in the Organization Man by William H. White, the author wrote this in the 1950s, I believe, and he kind of outlines this trend towards a collectivism society. And he actually talks about in schools and universities, there was such a strong interest from corporations to hire talented individuals that the curriculum and majors at large universities started to shift away from the humanities to more practical majors like engineering and business administration. Corporate influence is also removing this idea of the humanities, critical thinking, and really optimizing our education for actually what is required in a corporation. And I'm not making a judgment on the way that is. I'm just really trying to say that that can exist, but we should still be conscious of our own thoughts outside of our job. And I would even argue that if you are able to critically think, you'll probably go further in your career. So it's not really a knock on that, but it is a problem when we disregard what we exchange the more practical education for, which is the humanities. So it's just interesting that already you can see the connections between all these different books written at totally different times and by completely different people. When we think about what do we do, a book that I read that really resonated with me is the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And the thing about Benjamin Franklin is that he actually was pretty much self-taught. So I think he went to high school for 2 years, actually in Boston Latin, but he was only there for 2 years. And he writes a lot about the less formal, self-driven education that he went through. And obviously he went on to invent many things, and he was a very prudent businessman and eventually a political figure. And so he knew a lot of things about humanity and society. This goes back to reading, because that's how he learned, is through reading. And through doing so, he was able to generate ideas and thoughts and viewpoints on the world. And even further than that, he actually wrote a ton. And so when he started his printing press, one of the ways that he was able to drum up business was by publishing a newspaper where he would write articles himself about what was going on in society. Pretty much through this publication, he was able to get lots of subscribers and grow his business. So, back to Fareed Zakaria, reading, writing, and then that turns into thinking, and more importantly, critical thinking. So all in all, underscoring this entire experience for the past 6 months has been also getting off of social media. And I think that not only in and of itself does that make a huge change, but also the fact that I'm replacing it with reading has made even more of a difference. And so going back to Neil Postman and amusing ourselves to death, when we interact and engage with these platforms that are so stimulating and entertaining, we begin to expect the rest of our life to be the same. Getting off of social media, replacing it with books, has set me on this new path where I feel as though I'm engaging more with these books that I should have learned really in high school and college. So I'm almost re-educating myself, just like Benjamin Franklin did. And I hope to continue to do so and clarify my thoughts and publish these videos. So if you like any of these books, definitely feel free to comment and tell me what you thought. If you started your own reading journey, I want to know about it, and I want to know how that's going for you. And if you have any other books that might tie into these themes, definitely let me know as well. So I look forward to continuing this journey and sharing my thoughts with you.